Hi, everybody. It's actually been well over a week or two, as you can probably tell from the stamp on this video. But week 15 actually came the week after Thanksgiving. Uh, I then jumped off to PAX Unplugged for the rest of the week. We had finals week thereafter, where students had until the end of the week to submit the final versions of their projects. And now here we are uh, in the complete aftermath. The semester is well and truly over. And as of today, I received my teaching evaluations, which only get unlocked when grades have officially rolled, so that my final grading will not be impacted hypothetically by teaching evaluations. This is one of those things where I'm going to note kind of briefly the teaching evaluations, as you might imagine, in a small class with a strong sense of common cause, are very good. My teaching evaluations, as a general rule, are very good. But it's also important just to remember from the start, if you are a student or if you're a teacher or if you're just watching this for your own enlightenment, teaching evaluations have all kinds of built-in biases that instructors can't always overcome. In fact, they shouldn't be expected to overcome. There are other ways of assessing teacher success in all kinds of ways that are not laden with the kinds of biases that we see in student evaluations. My colleagues, we do collect them and use them for the deciding whether to retain instructors who don't have the protections of tenure, about the tenure cases of faculty members who are assistant professors looking to go to associate, and for tenured professors like me who are associates looking to be promoted to full, it's part of the ways in which we're evaluated. It sucks. But it is nice to have these moments where student feedback is detailed and specific and really lovely. For the record, most of the time, my colleagues only pay attention in these kinds of extraordinary cases of very specific praise, or when there are specific notification from student comments that certain kinds of labor is not getting done, like uh, grades aren't being returned in timely fashion, that kind of thing. Digression, digression, digression. This video is designed to give an overview of how the semester ended, as well as my final week practice of stars and wishes. In keeping with some of my professors in graduate school who would taper off the labor as students were ramping up their final projects, the last weeks have a little bit of a dial down of the intensity of our reading. And the last week is basically under the assumption that they are putting final polish on their projects. And so instead, we go super meta. I open the spreadsheet that I used to design the course. I show them basically how I develop it. This class was developed from the Playing Austin class, which you can also find documented on this channel. And I sat down with students 2 years ago when that class ended, and we did stars and wishes then. It is my policy to have time for students to talk to me directly rather than through the mechanism of teaching evaluations about what worked, what didn't, what they hope that the next iteration of this class will potentially include. And that really transforms especially these games classes. It's how the game classes at the undergraduate level have gone from uh, a kind of diversity of video as well as analog games towards analog games exclusively with an emphasis on role-playing games. Um, it's fitting in some ways that Quentin Smith was among our guests this semester because, of course, that is the narrative of his own movement, and his movement mirrors that of my students. An early fascination with video games that then transitions more and more into being interested in people and being with people at the table. Um, in a time when so much has been mediated by screens for our students for so long and still is, and automation is ruining all of our lives, the ability to put all of that aside for an hour or 2 or more and fully be present with one another, with the alibi of a game is really incredibly important. I've been thinking about this a lot also because things like the Playful Learning Association and things like that are thinking about how to use games in the classroom. And I know I get a lot of contact from folks who are thinking about games in the classroom um, as tools. And that's very much not what this class is about. This class is taking seriously the ideas that those games are not just conduits through which we can get to knowledge in a more fun way, because nothing kills the fun more than that. But instead, that they are um, literary objects or artistic objects in their own right. So, these are all the things that I'm talking about with my students from day one, and I'm reaffirming them as I show them how the sausage was made. I show them the ways in which I make a decision based on how long a text is, or how dense a text is, or whether I've heard about it from colleagues. I show them how the building blocks get built, and I show them the alternate universe versions of this class, not just the Playing Austin class, but the other modules that I considered including and why I didn't use them. In many cases, I moved to having a bunch of potential blocks at the end that students could choose from. And what was really exciting was that all of those alternate universe things were also exciting to students. Units on sex, gender, including sex work, thinking about the Story Brewers game, not Good Society, which is a perennial favorite, but instead the kind of free to play uh, game of courtesans and blackmail that also has an epistolary mechanic. Thinking about Frankenstein, I used to in 2016, in the lead up to the anniversary of the composition and then publication of Frankenstein, I was all in on Frankenstein. And maybe I'll circle back to that in 2 years. Who can say? Maybe it's time, maybe not. We'll see. But here are some of the stars and wishes and advice for future students that my students gave to me. So, in class gameplay continues to be popular. My digressive tangents also were popular. I think in a different class that might go in a different kind of way, but it's a small enough class that they feel kind of in on the joke of Dr. Friedman kind of going pop up video, even though pop up video is no longer a thing that means anything to my students. Got to think of a new metaphor. Although they did cite Dr. Friedman talking about pop-up videos. They loved having 4 weeks, a whole month to read one novel, Jane Austen's Emma. And we did, as these videos have shown, use those weeks to explore other things, to read other smaller pieces as we moved through the novel, but to have the luxury of spending that time was something very appreciated. And this, in turn, was a response to Stars and Wishes from 2 years ago when we did an Austen novel a week. We got through the whole Austen canon in the course of the semester. That's a kind of kind of very intense sort of experience. But we are going slow and going deep, I think, is more and more going to be appealing uh, as my pedagogy develops. Zong was appreciated, which I'm so very grateful for because, of course, that was a big experiment and a big risk on my part. Um, the Haitian Revolution was totally new to every single student. And that's a reminder to all of us that if you are teaching about the Romantic period, about the late 18th or early 19th century, that is a really important cultural touchstone that our students just don't hear about. And it's really important to understanding where we are now in so many ways. And there are so many good resources for how to teach it. Students really liked the Kagamatsu hack, a single man in possession of good fortune, which was one of the earlier games that we played in class, that I used instead of Good Society to think about power in Austen. Even the DM thought that was good, and she was a brave person to take on that challenge so early on. Students really appreciated that we explored TTRPGs beyond Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and interacting with those TTRPGs. To that effect, the adopting a game, getting that sense of choice and play outside of class, even though it's really tricky to schedule those play times and things like that, it was something that students starred as something that was valuable in the class. They also liked that I didn't kind of fix the 18th century articles that students were presenting on, but that they got a certain amount of choice. It was all from one volume. So there was a constraint in terms of like they didn't have to go and find something themselves, but they got to choose among a set of options, which I think right now is a really good thing. I think giving students choice is really, really helpful, and they will rise to meet that challenge in many cases, especially at these advanced levels. Um, but also, everybody gets overwhelmed, and so being able to say, like, here are 3 to 5 choices, or pick a day, and then on that day there are these number of choices, is a workflow that I think is makes it more manageable. Students really liked the wide range of visitors, including people who are my collaborators, people who are from different fields, like Dr. Sepinwall, who is a historian rather than a literary historian. They Quentin Smith shows up in my teaching evaluations as an example of me being able to reach to my larger network to supplement with expertise that is not intuitive to me, which is really lovely. They've sung his praises many times. That is not surprising. I'm hoping and keeping fingers crossed that both Quinns will be joining us in the fall, and also that my teaching assignments will be able to best take advantage of that visit. Um, so yeah, and of course, my own home colleague, Dr. Zora Hamsa, who is, of course, in our department, but a Black Studies specialist, a 20th and 21st century specialist, whose theoretical apparatus is very different from my own. And I'm so incredibly grateful for the ways in which her presence and her intellectual contributions really allowed a lot of the class to bloom in ways that I couldn't have managed alone. It's interesting that I'm talking about class visitors. Right now on Blue Sky, there was a kind of kerfuffle about a professor who is adopting a lot of AI methodologies in terms of like making class resources and virtual TAs and basically outsourcing a whole lot of labor. And before that, somebody kind of unearthed a graduate syllabus of 10 weeks, of which 6 weeks had guest lectures. And it was interesting to kind of hear a bunch of people going, "Oh, that's outsourcing of labor," and like this is a professor who's trying to like get away with not doing anything. And I will say, like, that is an accurate, I think, assessment of this particular professor and their relationship to that labor. There's a lot of that syllabus looks a little coercive in terms of like who she was convincing to give like full on lectures as opposed to these kinds of Q and A's, which, as our videos have talked about on this channel, were mostly half class sessions, and were robustly supported. And also, I'm present and an interlocutor in a lot of those. So there are ways to do this stuff. It's important to note badly, or without an eye to student success, or as a simple outsourcing of labor, but there are ways in which this can be a kind of enriching experience. I have a colleague who teaches a full class on Clarissa elsewhere, where there's like more or less an 18th centuryist almost every week, kind of popping in as a little, like, to give their little slice of, why they like the novel or why they find the novel interesting and fascinating, to bring scholarship to life. And I think that that's a beautiful thing that technologies like this give us, that ability to bring more folks into the conversation, even from far away, which is really, really lovely. The mix of non-canonical texts and canonical texts was appreciated. I really The fact that this is a student-led class in terms of a lot of its engagement and interest in student intellectual investments, student projects, those sorts of things was really appreciated. And Gina Zarowski's "Where Do You Know From" exercise, which I talk about in the first week, where students articulate those expertises and engagements and interests, was cited specifically. Um, it was very interesting when one student said, "No pressure makes you want to do better." This direct quote. And I was like, maybe rephrase that if you're going to include it in my evaluations. Like, I'm trying not to appear like I'm a pushover, like, to my colleagues. And that was not their intent, but it was really, really funny. That but and a reminder that this was like a dialing down of pressure in a space, like graduate school. um, Many of my colleagues believe that we're in an arms race, um, where uh, that uh, we all have to be the hardest, scariest professor, or we won't get our students to do what we want them to do and need them to do. And that is a challenge that I have faced in the past, that my work has not been triaged. And it's one of the things that I flagged more and more for my students, that the deal is that I am supple and flexible, but I'm not going to kind of lay down and die in those kinds of ways. So, wishes for more in-class gameplay. Students are really excited about the possibility of Captain Singleton and Pirates. So, Nush Powell, we're coming for you. Um, uh, we discussed something that's beyond my scope, but it's something that we've all focused on as a kind of reality of the way in which our classroom operates. Our classroom is wired really beautifully for sound and video. If what your goal is to have someone delivering a lecture virtually or recording a lecture for like a hybrid course, it's not really great in terms of camera angles for a discussion. And we found some workarounds for that, but it still remains pretty creepy. And I go back and forth, and we discussed kind of the two different options. One option is to send everybody home or to their own individual computers so that we can be on Zoom and be face to face in that way. We did that for Quinn's visit because it was a full day class visit. um, but more often we're in the classroom, for half of the class, and the poor visitor, like, has this really creepy, like, surveillance angle on the table and can't really see. So by Dr. Sepinwall's visit, I had used my iPad as a secondary Zoom to, kind of move around so that she could have an angle on people's faces as they spoke. We'll see. Forgive the beeping if you hear it. My oven has gone off because I've gone longer than anticipated. Advice that my students gave: don't forget about the adopted game. Know that scheduling is hard with other people. Take the class, and you need to clap. They clapped every single class, guys. It was extraordinary. It was absolutely extraordinary. So my reflections are that this has been one of the, like, regenerative classes of my pedagogical experience. I've had lots of wonderful classes before. This one is coming, as is true for many of us, after a period of the challenges of remote and hybrid teaching, the challenges of, the kind of, lingering impacts of being in a global pandemic, changing, kind of sentiments around the humanities, all kinds of things. So it's really wonderful to have a class that fills my cup in addition to allowing me to serve my students. And uh, I am on teaching leave in the spring. This channel largely goes a little bit dark. In the spring and summer when I'm not teaching. That may change. If you have requests or recommendations for things that you might be interested in knowing about. Obviously, any teaching presentations that we're able to record or scholarly presentations will find a home on this channel. Um, but I'm working on my book on actual play through the spring and into the summer. I'll be doing a lot of traveling related to that research and collaboration. But all signs point to that I will have at least one class incorporating games in the fall of 2025. And so I will see you then.